We are living through a paradox that the textbooks cannot explain. If you look at the streets of San Francisco, the Rust Belt of Ohio, or the crumbling bridges of the American interior, you see the undeniable signs of a collapsing empire. You see the same decay that plagued Rome in the 5th century and the British Empire in the post-war years. You see a currency losing its purchasing power, a populace divided by rage, and a government paralyzed by debt. By every historical metric, the United States is in its final stage. And yet, if you look at the stock market, if you look at the balance sheets of the largest technology companies in human history, and if you look at the sheer accumulation of wealth at the top, you see an empire that is not only thriving, but expanding. The S&P 500 hits all-time highs, while the average citizen takes on a second job to pay for groceries. The artificial intelligence sector adds trillions of dollars in value, while the physical power grid struggles to keep the lights on. How can these two realities exist simultaneously? How can a nation be dying, while its economy appears to be conquering the future? The answer lies in a concept that most financial analysts are too afraid to touch because it shatters the comfortable illusion of the nation-state. The answer is that the United States empire is not dying. It is moving. For the first time in history, we are witnessing the Great Detachment. Throughout the last 5,000 years of human history, empires were physical entities. They were bound by geography, by blood, and by land. When Rome fell, the Roman elite could not simply upload their wealth to a cloud server and move to a new jurisdiction. Their power was tied to the legions on the border and the grain shipments from Egypt. When the walls were breached, the empire died and the wealth was looted. But the 21st century has introduced a variable that breaks this historical cycle. We have transitioned from an economy based on atoms to an economy based on digits. And this transition has allowed the true empire, the aggregation of capital, technology, and influence, to decouple itself from the physical host of the United States. What you are feeling when you go to the grocery store or look at the housing market is the friction of this detachment. You are witnessing the old shell being discarded while the new entity is being born in a digital realm that has no borders, no allegiance, and no need for the physical infrastructure of the past. To understand where we are going, we must first understand the mechanism of this theft, because that is what it is. It is a transfer of value from the physical world to the digital world, from the labor of the many to the assets of the few. It began silently in 1971 when the link between the dollar and gold was severed, but it accelerated violently in 2020. When the Federal Reserve printed trillions of dollars, they did not distribute that wealth to build bridges or factories. That liquidity flowed directly into the financial markets. It flowed into the coffers of BlackRock, Vanguard, and the technology monopolies. It was a signal that the priority of the system had shifted. The goal was no longer to sustain the American middle class. The goal was to build a lifeboat for capital. Consider the behavior of the world's largest asset managers. If they truly believed that the American empire was collapsing in the traditional sense, they would be hoarding physical gold, farmland, and ammunition. While they are buying some of that, their primary aggressive moves are into the digital ecosystem. They are building the infrastructure for a tokenized world. They are approving spot ETFs for Bitcoin and Ethereum. They are investing billions into artificial intelligence data centers that consume more energy than entire nations. Why would they do this? Because they know that the next Rome is not a city on a map. The next Rome is the network itself. They are betting that the laws of the United States will matter less than the code of the blockchain and the protocols of the internet. They are preparing for a world where the jurisdiction is the cloud. This brings us to the most uncomfortable truth of our time, which is the nature of the debt. The United States government is $35 trillion in debt, a number that is mathematically impossible to repay. In a traditional collapse, this results in a default. The currency goes to zero, the government falls, and chaos ensues. But the architects of the current system have found a workaround. They are not going to default on the debt. They are going to inflate it away while migrating their own assets into vehicles that are immune to that inflation. This is why you see the rush into hard assets that are actually digital. Bitcoin is often called digital gold, but that description is too simplistic. It is actually sovereign territory in cyberspace. When a major institution moves capital into the crypto ecosystem, they are effectively moving their wealth offshore, but to a shore that doesn't exist on any map. They are exiting the dollar system without technically leaving the United States. This migration explains the decay you see around you. If the empire is moving to the cloud, then the physical maintenance of the country becomes a liability rather than an asset. Why fix the roads in Ohio if your commerce is conducted on the blockchain? Why improve the public education system if your workforce is being replaced by algorithms? The neglect of the physical United States is not an accident of incompetence. It is a feature of the migration. The capital is being extracted from the legacy system to build the new one. It is a vampire economy, draining the life from the host to feed the new digital sovereign. This is why we see the phenomenon of tech feudalism. In the Middle Ages, you had serfs who worked the land for the protection of a lord. Today, we have digital serfs who provide the data and the attention that powers the algorithms of the new tech overlords. The difference is that the old lords needed the land to be fertile. The new lords only need the servers to be cold and the energy to be cheap. And speaking of energy, this is the final piece of the puzzle that the doom mongers miss. The currency of the future empire is not the paper dollar, and it isn't even really Bitcoin in isolation. The currency of the future is energy. In a world dominated by AI and digital ledgers, the ultimate scarce resource is the kilowatt hour. We are seeing a shift where the value of money is being repegged to the cost of energy and compute. The petrodollar died not because of Saudi Arabia, but because oil is a commodity of the physical world. The electrodollar is the currency of the digital world. The massive data centers being built by Amazon, Microsoft, and Google are the new central banks. They hold the compute, which is the ability to process intelligence and transactions. The nations that can generate cheap, abundant energy and convert it into digital intelligence will be the superpowers of the next cycle. This is why the stock prices of energy infrastructure and mining companies are diverging from the general economy. They are the shovels in the new gold rush. So, where does this leave you, the individual citizen, watching this great migration take place? The trap is to sit and wait for the crash. You are waiting for 1929, but you're living in a completely different timeline. If you wait for the stock market to collapse to zero, you might be waiting forever because the currency it is denominated in is being debased faster than the stocks can fall. The crash is happening, but it is happening to the purchasing power of your wages, not to the nominal price of the assets held by the elite. The danger is not that the system stops working. The danger is that the system leaves you behind. The detachment means that there will be two economies running in parallel. One will be the legacy economy, where you pay taxes in depreciating dollars, struggle with inflation, and rely on crumbling public services. The other will be the network economy, a global, borderless, high-velocity system where value is protected by cryptography, and opportunities are gated by access to digital assets. The window to cross the bridge from the dying empire to the migrating empire is closing. This is not about buying a specific stock or a specific coin. It is about understanding the direction of the flow. History shows us that when the elite detach from the populace, the gap never closes. It only widens until the old system becomes irrelevant. We are seeing the separation of money and state. Just as the separation of church and state defined the modern era, the separation of money and state will define the future. The state will be left with the debt and the obligations, while the money moves to the network. You are witnessing the greatest magic trick in financial history. The magician is waving the red flag of political chaos and culture wars with one hand to keep you distracted, while the other hand is quietly moving the gold, the intellectual property, and the power into a digital vault that you do not have the key to. Do not look at the pothole in the road and say, the empire is dying. Look at the data center being built next to the power plant and say, the empire is moving. The question is not whether the United States will survive. The geographic entity will remain. The question is whether you will remain a resident of the legacy decay, or if you will position yourself to be a citizen of the new digital jurisdiction. The cycle is not ending, it is mutating. And in nature, those who do not mutate with the environment go extinct. The dollar is the dinosaur. The network is the mammal. The meteor has already hit. It just hasn't finished burning up the atmosphere yet. Stop watching the impact site. Start looking for the organisms that are built to survive the winter. The great detachment is here. You can either be the asset that moves or the liability that gets left behind. The choice is yours, but the time to make it is running out faster than the debt clock is ticking. To truly understand the gravity of this situation, we must look backward before we look forward. History does not repeat, but it rhymes, and the rhyme we are hearing today is identical to the sound of the Dutch Empire in the 18th century. In the 1700s, Amsterdam was the financial capital of the world. They had the strongest currency, the deepest markets, and the most advanced technology of their time. But as their physical empire began to stagnate, the Dutch elite did something fascinating. They did not go down with the ship. Instead, they began to invest heavily in the debt and the industries of their rival, the British Empire. They effectively moved their capital from Amsterdam to London, slowly, methodically, over decades. By the time the Dutch state collapsed as a global power, the Dutch elite were already wealthy stakeholders in the British ascension. They detached from their nation to save their fortune. We are seeing the exact same mechanism today, but the destination is not London or Shanghai. The destination is the digital ledger. The American elite are behaving exactly like the Dutch bankers of 1780. They are harvesting the remaining equity of the United States, hollowing out the pension funds, leveraging the real estate, and financializing the corporate sector to fund their transition into the next epoch. This hollowing out process is disguised by the metric we call GDP, You are told the economy is growing, but you must ask, what exactly is growing? If a hospital charges 10 times more for a procedure that saves the same life, GDP goes up. If a lawsuit generates millions in legal fees, GDP goes up. If the government borrows $1 trillion to build missiles that are blown up in a desert, GDP goes up. We have replaced an economy of production with an economy of transaction. We have replaced the factory with the casino. And the house always wins. This is why the stock market can disconnect from reality. The stock market is no longer a reflection of the health of the American economy. It is a reflection of the amount of liquidity being pumped into the casino to keep the game going while the owners cash out their chips. The average person looks at the Dow Jones and thinks the country is rich. The analyst looks at the Dow Jones and sees hyperinflation of asset prices caused by a currency that is bleeding to death. And how do they keep the population from realizing the ship is sinking? They build a complexity wall. The financial system has been made intentionally complex so that the average citizen cannot follow the money. We talk about reverse repos, yield curve control, and derivatives exposure. These terms are linguistic barriers designed to bore you into submission. But the reality is simple. They are printing counterfeit value to pay for real resources. When you work for a month to earn a paycheck, you're trading your finite time, the only thing you truly own, for currency that they can create with a keystroke. It is the ultimate theft of time. And as this theft accelerates, the need for control increases. You cannot steal from a population forever without them eventually grabbing pitchforks. This is why we are seeing the rollout of the surveillance architecture that will define the next phase of the empire. This brings us to the most dangerous acronym in modern finance, CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currencies. Many people mistake CBDCs for just another form of crypto. They are the exact opposite. Cryptocurrency, in its true form, is decentralized and permissionless. A CBDC is centralized and permissioned. It is the fence being built around the legacy economy to keep the cattle from escaping. The great detachment we spoke of earlier is for the elite. The CBDC is for the rest. The plan is to introduce a programmable currency that gives the state total visibility and control over every transaction you make. Imagine a dollar that has an expiration date to force you to spend it to stimulate the economy. Imagine a dollar that cannot be used to buy meat or gasoline if you have exceeded your carbon quota. Imagine a dollar that can be frozen instantly if you dissent against the narrative. This is not science fiction. The pilots are already live in multiple countries. The transition to the network empire requires a gated system for the masses, ensuring that while capital can move freely for the masters, it remains locked down for the subjects. This is the two-tier society of 2030. Tier 1 is the sovereign individual, the person who holds assets in the decentralized network. Bitcoin, tokenized real estate, private equity, and AI protocols. This person operates globally, outside the reach of the inflating fiat currency. Tier 2 is the dependent citizen, the person who relies on the universal basic income provided by the CBDC, who rents their apartment from a BlackRock subsidiary, who leases their electric vehicle from a tech giant, and who owns nothing. The mantra, "You will own nothing and be happy," was not a prediction, it was a business plan. The subscription economy is the final stage of capitalism, where the goal is to strip all ownership from the consumer and turn them into a permanent renter of their own life. If you stop paying the subscription, you lose access to your home, your transport, and your money. But there is a flaw in their plan, and that is where your opportunity lies. The transition is not instantaneous. We are in the interregnum, the chaotic period between the death of the old and the birth of the new. In this period, the cracks in the system are wide enough for the individual to slip through. The empire is currently distracted. They are fighting proxy wars in Eastern Europe and the Middle East to maintain the illusion of geopolitical dominance. They are fighting internal culture wars to keep the population divided by race, gender, and ideology. While they are distracted, the exit doors are still open. The tools to become a Tier 1 individual are available to anyone with an internet connection and the will to learn. You can choose to opt out of the fiat system. You can choose to secure your wealth in cryptographic assets that no government can seize. You can choose to educate yourself on the technologies that will run the future: artificial intelligence, energy systems, and decentralized finance. The biggest lie you have been told is that you are powerless. The system spends billions of dollars on propaganda specifically because you are powerful. If the collective decided tomorrow to reject the fiat standard and move to a hard money standard, the vampire economy would starve overnight. They rely on your consent, and more importantly, they rely on your ignorance. They need you to believe that 401ks are safe. They need you to believe that the housing market only goes up. They need you to believe that the government is coming to save you. Once you shatter these illusions, you become dangerous to the status quo because you become independent. Let's look deeper at the geopolitical chessboard. The tension between the United States and China is often framed as a battle for territory. It is not. It is a battle for the operating system of the world. China is building a closed loop, a firewall internet, a state-controlled currency, and a manufacturing base that serves the state. The American empire is building a different beast, a corporate-controlled loop where the lines between the Pentagon, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street have dissolved. Notice how the weapons being sent to war zones are now integrating commercial AI software. Notice how the intelligence agencies rely on data purchased from private brokers. The military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about has mutated into the military computational complex. The wars of the future will not be fought just with tanks. They will be fought with algorithms that can crash a rival nation's power grid or delete their banking records. In this environment, physical safety is tied to digital safety. If you do not understand cybersecurity, you do not have security. This is why the doom channels are only half right. They see the fire, but they don't see the phoenix rising from the ashes. Yes, the pension funds are insolvent. Yes, the commercial real estate market is going to collapse. But trillions of dollars of wealth will not disappear. They will transfer. Wealth is energy. It cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred. We are witnessing the greatest wealth transfer in human history. It is moving from the impatient to the patient, from the uneducated to the educated, from the physical to the digital, from the public to the private. If you are holding government bonds, you are the liquidity for the exit. You are the one buying the bag while the smart money leaves the room. Consider the psychology of the herd. Human beings are evolutionarily wired to follow the crowd. When the herd is grazing calmly, it feels safe to graze. But when the predators are circling, the herd panics. We are currently in the phase where the predators, inflation, taxes, surveillance, are circling, but the herd is still grazing, distracted by the entertainment screens held in their hands. The Empire Cycles channel exists to be the warning shot, to tell you that the grass is dying and the wolves are here. But unlike the other channels that tell you to curl up and die, the message here is to evolve. The predator cannot catch what it cannot see. By moving your assets and your mindset into the network state, you become invisible to the old system of extraction. This is not about being a survivalist in a bunker with canned beans. That is a reaction to the wars of the last century. The survivalist of 2030 is the person with a diversified portfolio of digital hard assets, a passport that allows travel, and a skill set that leverages AI rather than being replaced by it. The collapse is not the end of the world, it is the end of their world. For the prepared, it is the beginning of a golden age. The technology we have today allows for a level of abundance and freedom that was unimaginable to our ancestors. But this abundance will not be distributed equally. It will be seized by those who position themselves before the drawbridge goes up. The empire is moving. The trucks are loaded. The lights are being turned off in the main building. The elites are heading to the new headquarters in the cloud. They are leaving the debt, the crumbling bridges, and the broken social contracts behind for the masses to fight over. You have a ticket in your hand right now. It is your attention. It is your capital. It is your ability to learn. Do not tear that ticket up by watching the old world burn. Use it to board the train to the new world. The separation is happening now. The dollar is the past. The network is the future. Which side of the divide will you be on when the history books are written? This is not a drill. This is the mutation, and it is just getting started. To fully grasp the magnitude of this mutation, we must peel back the layers of the illusion even further. We need to talk about the shadow banking system. Most people believe that money is created by the government or the Federal Reserve. This is a half-truth that serves to obscure the reality. The majority of the dollars that circulate in the global economy are not printed in Washington. They are created in the shadows, in the offshore eurodollar market, by foreign banks that are not subject to American reserve requirements. This system worked beautifully for 50 years to export American inflation to the rest of the world. It allowed the United States to consume goods from Asia and pay for them with IOUs that would never be called in. But that system has broken. The sanctions on Russia in 2022 sent a shockwave through this shadow network. It told the world that the dollar is not a neutral reserve asset, but a political weapon. When you weaponize the global reserve currency, you do not strengthen it, you murder it. You force your adversaries and even your allies to build alternative rails. We are seeing the construction of the BRICS Bridge, a payment system designed specifically to bypass the New York clearinghouses. This is not a distant threat. It is an active demolition of the demand for U.S. Treasury bonds. And when demand for your debt collapses, you have only one option. You become the buyer of last resort. You print the difference. This leads us to the inevitable yield curve control, a technical term that masks a horrifying reality. It means the central bank must print infinite money to keep the government's borrowing costs from exploding. Japan has been doing this for decades, and their currency has collapsed in value against real assets. The United States is now entering the Japanese trap. But the difference is that Japan is a creditor nation with a cohesive culture. The United States is the world's largest debtor with a fractured culture. When yield curve control arrives in America, and it will, under a different name to avoid panic, It will mark the official end of the free market in bonds. At that moment, the price of money becomes a fiction dictated by the state. And when the price of money is fake, the price of everything else becomes fake. The cost of bread, the cost of housing, the value of your labor, all of it becomes untethered from reality. This is the environment where the empire thrives, but the citizen drowns. The empire thrives because it owns the assets that reprice higher, the real estate, the stocks, the commodities. The citizen drowns because their wages are sticky. They do not rise fast enough to catch up to the cost of living. This is the mechanism of the squeeze. It is not an accident. It is the mathematical certainty of a debt-based system reaching its maturity. Let us look at the historical precedent of the Weimar Republic in 1923. Everyone knows the photos of Germans pushing wheelbarrows of cash to buy a loaf of bread. But what history books often leave out is that the German stock market gained trillions of percent during that hyperinflation. If you owned shares in German industrial companies, you became fabulously wealthy in nominal terms. You preserved your purchasing power. If you held cash, you starved. The lesson from history is not that everything goes to zero. The lesson is that paper goes to zero, utility goes to infinity. In the coming decade, the divide will be between those who hold utility, farmland that grows food, energy companies that produce power, cryptocurrencies that secure value, and those who hold promises, bonds, insurance policies, and savings accounts. The empire has already positioned itself in utility. They are buying the water rights in South America. They are buying the lithium mines in Africa. They are buying the validator nodes on the Ethereum network. They are shorting the promise and going long on the utility. But there is a psychological component to this transition that is even more potent than the financial one. It is called normalcy bias. It is the refusal of the human mind to accept a disaster that has not happened before in its lifetime. The average American has lived their entire life in a period of U.S. hegemony. They cannot conceive of a world where the dollar is not the king. This bias is the ultimate trap. It causes people to rationalize the warning signs. When inflation hits 10%, they say, it's just a supply chain issue. When banks fail, they say, the government fixed it. When political violence erupts, they say, it's just a protest. They are boiling frogs, unable to sense the temperature rising until it is too late to jump. The Empire Cycles viewer must surgically remove this bias from their mind. You must look at the world with the cold, detached eyes of an alien observer. If you arrived from Mars and looked at the U.S. balance sheet, 35 trillion in debt, 200 trillion in unfunded liabilities, and a political system in gridlock, would you lend money to this entity? Of course not. You would run. The market is only lending to it because of inertia, and inertia is a powerful force until it hits a wall. We must also discuss the role of artificial intelligence in this new feudalism. AI is the ultimate deflationary force. It drives the cost of intelligence to zero. In a healthy economy, this would lead to a paradise of abundance where goods and services become nearly free. But in our debt-based system, deflation is the enemy. The system needs inflation to service the debt. So we're about to witness a war between the deflationary power of technology and the inflationary power of the printing press. The technology wants to make things cheaper. The government wants to make things more expensive. The result of this war will be extreme volatility. We will see massive crashes followed by massive melt-ups. The empire controls the AI. They will use it to replace the middle-class white-collar worker, the accountants, the coders, the lawyers. These professions were the bedrock of the American dream. Their erosion will create a permanent underclass of unemployable citizens who will be forced onto the CBDC dole. This is why the detachment is so critical to understand. The elite do not need a thriving middle class to buy their products anymore. They have global markets. They do not need a tax base to fund their operations. They have the printing press. The social contract that said, work hard and you will succeed, has been unilaterally canceled. Furthermore, we must analyze the balkanization of the internet, often called the splinternet. The global internet we grew up with is dying. It is fracturing into regional blocks. The Chinese internet, the Russian internet, the Western internet, each will have its own truth, its own currency, and its own rules. The empire is building bridges between these islands for themselves, while burning the bridges for you. They can move capital from New York to Singapore instantly. But you, if you try to move more than $10,000, you're treated like a criminal. Capital controls are coming. They will not be announced with a press conference. They will be implemented quietly. For your safety, they will say. To fight terrorism, they will say. But the real reason is to keep the liquidity trapped inside the burning house to burn off the debt. The only escape tunnel is the one they cannot close. The decentralized cryptographic networks that run on satellites and mesh networks, independent of the undersea cables they control. This is why they attack privacy tools. This is why they attack self-custody wallets. They know that a citizen who holds their own keys is a citizen they cannot tax via inflation. Let's take a moment to look at the energy markets again, because this is where the rubber meets the road. The green energy transition is often sold as an environmental necessity, and perhaps it is, but through the lens of empire, it is something else. It is a method to restrict supply. By discouraging investment in oil and gas before the alternatives are ready, they have engineered a structural energy shortage. Scarcity creates profit. The energy giants are recording record profits, not despite the regulations, but because of them. The regulations are the moat that protects the incumbents from competition. Consider the bread and circuses of the modern era. In Rome, they gave the people cheap grain and gladiator games to distract them from the collapse. Today, we have cheap fast food and infinite streaming services. The dopamine loops of social media are the new Colosseum. They are designed to keep you sedated, angry at your neighbor, and distracted from the man behind the curtain picking your pocket. The attention economy is mining your mind just as they mine the earth for gold. Every hour you spend arguing in a comment section is an hour you are not building skills, not acquiring assets, and not organizing with your community. The rebellion against the empire begins with reclaiming your attention. It begins with turning off the feed and looking at the balance sheet. So, what is the timeline? Humans love dates, but systems operate in phases. We are currently in the late stage 5 of the classic empire cycle, the era of decadence and debasement. The next phase is stage 6, the reset. A reset is not the end of the world. It is a rewriting of the rules. In 1944, the rules were rewritten at Bretton Woods. In 1971, they were rewritten by Nixon. In 202X, they will be rewritten again. The most likely outcome is a basket of currencies, backed by a mix of commodities and gold, digitized on a ledger. The US dollar will likely remain, but it will be a local currency, much like the British pound is today. Respected, but not dominant. The transition from dominance to relevance is painful. It involves a drop in the standard of living for the importing nation. Americans are used to cheap electronics, cheap clothes, and cheap fuel. Those days are ending. The Empire Cycle's thesis predicts a return to hard reality. Things will cost what they actually cost, not what the subsidized, financialized price says they cost. However, there is a silver lining, a massive one. Chaos is a ladder. The rigidity of the old system stifled innovation. It protected the dinosaurs. As the old structures crumble, the green shoots of the new economy can finally breathe. We are seeing an explosion of innovation in decentralized finance, in localized manufacturing, 3D printing, in vertical farming, and in peer-to-peer energy trading. The collapse of the centralized empire creates a vacuum for decentralized solutions. The future belongs to the small, the agile, and the sovereign. The person who produces their own energy, banks their own wealth, and thinks for themselves is the new aristocracy. The detachment is not just for the billionaires. It is available to you if you have the courage to grasp it. You must build your own personal empire, a fortress of solitude in a chaotic world. This involves 3 pillars. 1, financial sovereignty. Do not keep all your eggs in the basket of a bank that is technically insolvent. Diversify into assets that have no counterparty risk. 2, digital sovereignty. Own your data. Use encrypted communications. Do not feed the algorithm that hunts you. 3, physical sovereignty. Build a network of real people in the real world, a community of like-minded individuals who can trade skills and support each other. The empire is moving to the cloud, but you still live in a body. You need a tribe. In conclusion, do not let the fear paralyze you. Fear is the mind killer. The doom porn on YouTube is designed to keep you scared and passive. This channel, Empire Cycles, is designed to make you aware and active. The United States is changing. It is shedding its skin. The process is ugly, violent, and loud. But underneath, a new organism is forming. You can mourn the old shell, or you can study the new organism and learn how to ride it. The greatest fortunes in history were not made during times of stability. They were made during times of transition. The Rothschilds during the Napoleonic Wars. The industrialists during the shift from agriculture to machines. And now the sovereign individuals during the shift from nation-state to network state. You are standing on the precipice of the greatest change in 500 years. The wind is blowing hard. You can build a windbreak to hide, or you can build a windmill to generate power. The empire has made its choice. It is moving. Now, you must make yours. Will you stay in sync with the legacy structures, clinging to a nostalgia for a world that is gone? Or will you detach, adapt, and migrate to the future? The cycle turns. The wheel spins. The opportunity is here. Welcome to the new reality. Welcome to the empire of the future.